And we're off. Welcome to Common Mansplaining, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Welcome back, Christian. How's it going?
Excellent. Outstanding.
Sweet, sweet, sweet. All right, guys, we got a fun one today. We are going to talk about political crisis management, right? Like this was a crisis management tool, right? And so political crises are different than your typical crises, in that crises happen everywhere in your life, but political crisis, only in political crisis is there like this magical media spin on literally every single event or incident that takes place, right? And some crises are real, some crises are at least partially manufactured.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of them are entirely manufactured, right? Like
Yeah.
so it's a giant spectrum. It's not just like real and fake. And what's the adage that you gave me the other day? Like, never let a good crisis go to waste, right?
That's the revolutionist.
Yeah.
Handbook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think
ahead.
as a stinger, we should entice people. If you stay here at the end, we'll both share our opinions on what we think the actual biggest crisis in America is right now.
Okay.
I know you said you think the biggest threat is AI, but that's not quite a crisis yet, right? And I think my biggest threat is people not wanting to have families, and that's a threat, but it's not quite a crisis. But we'll talk at the end. So some thinking about what do you think an actual crisis is. But right, what we want to talk about is blown out of proportion or hyped up,
right.
And how we need to see through that, how we need to not be deceived by it.
Absolutely, yeah. And so crises can be used for like all sorts of things in politics, right? They can be used to like to kind of amass political capital, to position yourself in for power, to win elections, to hurt your political rivals, to to pivot your attention from one thing to another. So they can be used for a lot of different things, but one of the patterns that you're going to see today is how they're often used to get you to surrender your freedoms, your liberties, right? And that's a very common one. And so the big questions that I would have everybody ask as we go through some of these today are, who crafts the crisis? Like who's generating the steam behind what makes people think it's a crisis? Sometimes it does it by itself if it's really a real issue. But sometimes it's given a little help along the way. What's the effect? Like what is the fact that this crisis is an important one? What does that do to your life? And who stands to gain most by those effects? Right. Those are the big questions. So let's start with one that I would call.
I would add one more to that when you think about the long-term changes or outlook on that crisis through history. When you look back on it, did it live up to the hype? What did we learn from it? So let's just add that one for the crisis we talk about.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, actually. Yeah. So let's start with one that I think is for the most part wholly real, for the most part, and that is the crisis that took place during 9/11. Right, the big attack. We know that the event happened, right? There's really no question about that. There was definitely an event that took place on September 11, 2001, and there was definitely a lot of loss of life. There was a huge tragedy. Buildings were smashed. Exactly.
Loss of life.
Yeah. 5,000, I think, four plus at least. Well, the biggest single loss of life since Pearl Harbor on American soil, which is not small. So,
but not a military base. I want a distinction.
Right.
Like at least Pearl Harbor, they were attacking soldiers in a base, a declared place. So this was 9/11 was a crisis because innocent people were being attacked, not in a place of war.
Right, civilian. Right, people who did not sign up for it. Absolutely, and so so it did happen. Now the question is, there's some questions about whether or not it happened exactly as the primary narrative indicates. And this is one thing to look at as you look at these crises. Just like most stories in the media, there's going to be like a primary narrative, and then there's going to be like alternative theories, right? And one thing that people do is to kind of poo-poo the alternative theories immediately by calling them conspiracy theories or like essentially slinging slurs at the theory. When in reality, what we should be doing is like, as long as it's not, as long as it is a plausible alternative. It shouldn't be, just thrown at the as long as it fits all the facts.
Yeah, should be worthy of investigation. That's all we're saying sometimes, right? But when you say like, no, this is not worthy to be investigated, i.e., Biden laptop kind of thing, is when people go, whoa, we're not going to even look into this. Like the threshold is low.
Right, absolutely. So so there's some things that went down with 9/11 that like could be called into question. Things like the Building 7 and how it collapsed, and what do they call it, the dancing Israelis. Have you heard about this? I don't know, but yeah. Anyway, so there's a lot
of dancing Arabs. I've heard of lots of dancing groups. Yeah,
dancing. Everybody dances, but yeah. But the big thing though is if let's say that this was crafted in any way, right? Let's say that there were some conspiracies that were going on, right? The big thing to ask yourself is like, who stands to gain behind a lot of this, right? So like you look at the effects. So what are the effects of 9/11? What happened was we very immediately went into a very aggressive posture against terrorism around the world. We did the war on terror, right? And we went to like our military industrial complex ramped up. Right, a lot of people started going to active deployments all over the place. We went to, Afghanistan and everything, and we went around and did all this stuff. And so then you can immediately see like who stands to gain, right? Well, obviously our military-industrial complex stood to gain. Obviously, the American hegemony stood to gain because it allowed us to exert hard power everywhere, like start deploying people everywhere. It allowed us to demonstrate our military strength. It allowed us to do a lot of things like that. And like there was stuff at home too that definitely like the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was huge.
Yeah. So one of the things too is it also diverted. The Bush administration was kind of like it was going to be kind of like a peacetime administration, right? We're like, okay, how do we deal with these kind of domestic issues? We were coming off an era of prosperity in the late 90s, right? And while there had been terrorist attacks against soldiers, like the bombing of the USS Cole, bombing of some embassies, those were in other countries against essentially soldiers or agents of the U.S. And so it hadn't reached crisis level. But this completely reoriented the whole administration, right?
Yes.
Bush immediately said in response to this crisis, like, this was the focus of my administration now. Like his Department of Justice had, his different white collar crimes and different like things, maybe child trafficking and all the things that they were gonna boom, all that stuff gets like, put that away. We're going after counterterrorism. Like everything became counterterrorism. And in that brief period of unity in response to the crisis, we got declarations of war against Afghanistan. And then the Patriot Act, I think was the big one where, right. So this is a thing, a pattern. Looking back to World War II was the last time that we really see a war declared. In America, I guess war was declared against Korea, but not against Vietnam, and not against anybody else. But war declared that the government was saying, all right, in response to this crisis, we need drastically more power than we had before. And surveillance, especially in things like that our privacy security was trumping that.
Yeah, absolutely right. And so that's the thing, right? It's funny too, because I remember back when it took place, right? And of course, this was right after I was joined the military, right? So it I was a young, idealistic hothead, and of course, right? Like I was young, I needed the money. It's one of those things where at the time, I remember being like so in favor of the Patriot Act, right? I remember being so in favor of our a war on terror. I remember being so in favor. I was like such a neocon, I was such a, and I was young and I didn't know. I'm still a patriotic guy. I'm still like very much in U.S.'s camp. I still feel like we're the best nation on earth, but my eyes are definitely a lot wider open than they were back then. And now, at the time, now I look back and I'm like, why did I ever agree to the Patriot? Like, I looked at some of the stuff in the Patriot Act, and some of it's okay. It's like just normal security measures, but some of it is like blatantly against the Constitution, in my opinion. And I like you guys, you don't have to agree with me, but I think there are aspects of it like like they have. I mean, there's compulsions of data from businesses that they require. There's like national safety letter guidelines that they put up. People are like have gag orders placed on them based on the orders given to them from the government and stuff like that. There's like a huge broadening of the definition of like terrorism, and like it can even fit some like protests. Like you can just be out there protesting like this is a terrorist action. You're like, whoa, like
Yeah.
it changed so many things, and not to mention like what was the big one? There was like
Well, the detainees that we can put people in Guantanamo Bay indefinitely,
forever,
extra
right?
legal detention. Yeah.
Right, like we just call it a national a violation of national security or security.
Enemy combatant or something. Boom.
Wow, I mean, and then there were like, what's there's one that was like sneak and peek searches. That was like a complete violation of the Fourth Amendment, where you could just like back in the day, you had to you had to give notice of your warrant before you searched something, and now like they changed it around so that you could just kind of like take a look around, then find something, then be like, oh, based on the fact that I found something, we have probable cause to be here. Like, what? That is just outrageous, and and that stuff is still going on right now. It's used in 90% of drug busts, which, in case you weren't paying attention, has nothing to do with counterterrorism. Like it's got nothing to do with.
It's removed by 2 or 3 degrees.
Right. Yeah. I mean, of
opiates were part of Afghanistan, but for the most part, Europe.
Sure. But it's like this is the pattern, and I want you guys to focus as we go through these, because here's a situation. Let's amplify the fear, and when you guys are all afraid, we're going to ask you, do you want us to come in and give you more security? And what that's code for is, do you want us to come in and take away some of your rights? And that's the game.
Yeah. Well, the long thing, ever since the French Revolution, right, when there was a crisis, it was government change. And so you can either, the response to the crisis is be thrown out of power, like the French monarchs were, or the Russian monarchs when they hit the Depression and World War I, and they were thrown out of power. Or if you're in power, right, what's your response? You've got to show like, hey, I'm taking this crisis seriously. Don't throw me out of power. I'm gonna gobble up more power to me, kind of thing. It was interesting because World War II became a model in an industrialized, or in the administrative state, right? So FDR had already expanded government because he was Democrat and had these. But with the declaration of World War II, it sort of legitimized all the stuff that people were fighting against. Like he could ration, food rationing, meat, how much meat, protein you get a week, all these kinds of things, how far you could travel, what you could use metal for. I mean, it gave him complete control of the economy. He could nationalize industries. He could say, your factory is now making, wings for airplanes now. And the fact that we won the war justified all of that. And it was look how great, that we can mobilize something. Look how good we are as a country, as a government at administering things, right? Not when you look back as a historian, you look at like so much waste in World War II and stuff, and so many like experimental planes that were never really even. It was just somebody realized there's blank checks here to be written.
Right.
Hey, I want to develop a plane for you, right? And you have these army surplus stores for the next 40 years selling materials made, during that period of time, because it was like anything I can make, I can sell, right? So there was a lot of sort of self-dealing.
Yeah, there's like a muscle memory involved too, because after there's like a fear event like that, any type of fear event, it's like that level of control can be extended for a good, several years afterwards, which is why FDR was so easily able to say, like, look, okay, look at all the damage that was caused from World War II. Don't you want us to put in Social Security and da 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 and about 11 different things? And of course, everybody's like, oh yeah, we have to do something about all of this damage, and so let's give $1 million to Europe every year, and let's give you just throw money at stuff, and that's
well the thing is, right? What they saw is American people in their patriotism were willing to submit to that. They're willing to take upon deprivations because this was like a way that they could support like the common folk who couldn't go over and pull a trigger, who weren't skilled, in any way that would be helpful to the military cause by, the one thing, okay, I only get to eat roast beef on Sunday once a month instead of, every Sunday or something now. Like this type of rationing was a way for them to feel a part of it, I guess, feel connected to it and feel like the whole country was mobilized. Now, what you happen is leftists still look upon that fondly and will use that. They want that type of, Patton talked about nothing moves stuff quite like war, right? Compared to war, everything pales in comparison. So like Lyndon Johnson wanted to create a big expansion of the welfare state, right? What did he call it? The war on poverty, right?
Yeah.
So he uses war, right? He uses like, okay, there's a crisis to the level of a war, and we need to mobilize, we need to change, expand our power, expand our government, like we would react to a war crisis, right?
Right.
And so that's looked upon not very well, but it has been the playbook that's saying, hey, if there's a crisis, you can get stuff passed, and American people, at least for a while, will support you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. And that's the note the use of words too, right? Like that's part of the game. Do you ever watch the movie? What is it called? Wag the Dog.
Yes,
it's a great movie. Fantastic. I highly recommend everybody watch it. But it's fantastic in that, like, the whole thing is a game from start to finish of manufacturing crisis after crisis after crisis. Like, well, why wouldn't they? We're going to get slaughtered. After, like, no, you'll be just fine. It's like, why? Well, because of the war. What war? And they just like make one, right? And so like the whole game is like manufacturing crisis after. It's a great movie. But anyway, but of course all the game is in the propaganda arm, right? All you have to do is just like use the right words, say war on X, war on poverty, war on terror, war on drugs, war on this, war on that, and it's war. And then of course everybody's like, oh wow, we got to do this. We're at war, like it's really easy, right?
Are we in though after post 9/11? Now, I think one of the big things, obviously, people felt like, and I can see this, that we overplayed the crisis card with the war in Iraq. That we manufactured the WMD crisis as an excuse to go and attack Iraq really before we needed to. Now, we can have a separate debate on that. But since then, I felt like America has been in a little bit of a crisis fatigue. Right?
Yeah.
Has sort of like when people come calling crisis, they're a little bit like,
it's like,
okay, slow your roll a little bit, especially right. Trump's a threat to our democracy, is a constitutional crisis, just having him be the president, right? And a lot of people said, because the language of the mainstream press, right, when he was first elected was so strong, a lot of people got caught up into that. And a lot of people are now being red-pilled. A good friend of mine, who was just, thought there was, the whole American system institutions were all collapsing, would all collapse with Trump in office. Obviously, that didn't happen, just because he's prosecuting policies the left doesn't like in a rather mean-spirited way sometimes, right? It's not the end of the Constitution, but it was pitched that it was such a crisis. People reacted, right, or that, right, so. Now, what do you think, right, rather than talking about what are the actual crises, what do you think are the big crises that the media or the elites want us to buy into now?
Yeah, right. So, and I'd like to hear from the audience too, if you guys have one that you think is a big one. I think Man, clear and present crises that are like active this very moment. I think, of course, Trump is still probably number one on that list. It's as shameful as that is, because he just represents, counter to a lot of the establishment. Obviously, Trump doesn't like elites very much, other than himself, who is in fact an elite. But aside from him, he doesn't like any other elites essentially. But yeah, so he's a big one. Climate change is big.
Yeah.
Climate area is huge, and I got to
Climate's not
say.
just America. Worldwide, everybody's complaining. All the elites
Right.
say that
Right.
climate change is a crisis.
Right. And so this is one that I would call half real, right? Like
Okay.
for those of you guys who are out there, I encourage you to watch our we did an episode on climate change and disasters and stuff. The big thing about climate change though is that there's aspects of it that are accurate, right? The parts of it that are accurate are climate's change, right? We do have to be good stewards of the planet. It can become dangerous or hazardous to certain aspects of the environment if we don't take care of the planet. Like that's just normal.
Yeah, there's some
Like,
common sense. Yeah.
very, very basic stuff,
Let's
right?
not
Like
dump gasoline into our rivers or something.
right. Don't like go out and just kill every animal you see. I mean, obviously, there's like obvious stuff, basic generic stuff that we should do to take care of the planet, to be good stewards. There's even stuff that's like down the road could get worse. Like, for example, I think probably temperatures can climb to the point where polar ice caps melt and cause some problems we'll have to geoengineer our way out of, or people are going to have to move or something like that, right? There's stuff that can happen. But
yeah,
what absolutely will not happen is Earth turning into some kind of like runaway greenhouse effect that makes us into a second Venus. Like, literally, the scientific studies say that the chances of that happening are virtually 0%. And I've seen several of them. If you guys need me to quote some to you, I'd be happy to. It just will not. But even though the science says that, the media runs in a different direction. They publish articles that say, like, what was one of the one of the articles said, we push the planet into a runaway greenhouse apocalypse. Another one said the uninhabitable Earth. Okay,
well,
let me just
yeah.
clear up the rumors, right? We are not going to be uninhabitable. Not for the next couple billion years. That's what the science says. Right? We're not going to be uninhabitable. Yes, do we need to take care of Earth? Sure. But then ask yourself, who's crafting this? What are the effects? And why does it, who does it benefit, right?
Well, right. Well, before we get to that, just historically, I mean, the environmental of the Greens is really a phenomenon since the 60s. It's kind of a hippie thing of caring for our Earth, Mother Earth. And what's been interesting is that they realized it was a source of fundraising. As soon as the people who were very concerned about these things were willing to give great deals of money to candidates that supported it, right?
That's it.
So money started talking. They started putting money behind it, and they started talking about these dire consequences, right? So yeah, frankly, in the 70s, you had leaded gasoline, you had a lot of industrial pollution, you had a lot of issues. Well, technology has improved in there and a lot of things, and we've been able to, right? We're not releasing poison into the air in our cities. I grew up in Los Angeles when they had smog crisis. There was a oil refinery not very far from my home that we would have bad air days. They shut that thing down. New ones are much cleaner. Like that, you don't have the smog like you did back then. I mean, you'll get fogged. And so now we weren't having pollutants being released into our air. We even solved the ozone layer crisis, right?
Right.
So now, like, where was the crisis? Oh, carbon dioxide, an organic material we breathe, right? That for me is what I'm like, okay, look, I was with you on the poison. I was with you on the lead. I was with you on stuff bad for the ozone layer, chemicals.
Right.
But when you start complaining about an organic compound, right,
that
is not
pollution, to breathe.
That is not pollution.
Right.
This is just a power grab. This is just a way to justify your taxes, spend money, redistribute wealth, right? That's for me is when I jumped off the boat, right? The climate crisis we dealt with it, right? We weren't in crisis anymore. Maybe there are climate issues that they would, right, but we can adjust with them. But the crisis, I think, has ended.
Yeah, right. So that's part of the thing that you have to ask yourselves too, is like, what is the time frame that you're dealing with? I think I did this. It was like I don't even remember because it's been so long since I've been a manager, but like we did this like one thing that kind of like, it was like a graph. It's like, time sensitive versus non-time sensitive, urgent, like stuff like that. And like, you'd have to, obviously the urgent time sensitive issues are the things that you're supposed to prioritize, about like prioritizing your day and managing your time and stuff like that. We got to get to the point where if we're looking at something that might cause some discomfort 75 years from now, that's not a crisis, right? That's something to keep an eye on, right? Like, that's the difference, right? Like, 9/11 was a crisis because, bam, 5,000 people dead today.
Yeah, and we had to change,
right?
And
like, not maybe
no, we
75
can't fly safely. Can we get on an airplane safely? We didn't know. Like, the uncertainties were so big.
Right. And so, like, that's the big difference between a try. But then again, ask yourself, who stands to gain? Christian mentioned, all these people are ready to give money away for this thing, right? Obviously, the person that's starting to receive that money stands to gain, and so it shouldn't be too much of a stress. We should all, as common men, we should all be skeptical about someone who is receiving large quantities of money to do something, right? Or to spin something in a certain way, or to project something. Anybody who's getting that's why I don't trust big pharma.
They're telling it, they're espousing a viewpoint, a narrative, which is fine, an argument, but it's not necessarily, the whole,
right. And then ask yourself, what, again, like, what's being asked of you, really? Like, that's the real question, right? Are you being asked to give money? Sometimes you are, but sometimes it's a little bit more insidious than that. Like, for example, with regard to climate change, a lot of the penalty, a lot of the cost we have to pay is kind of like, it's what I would call a soft cost. You don't see it right away. They're not really coming to your door and saying, hey, will you please donate, $5,000 to da 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 da. What they're doing is they're saying, like, look, you don't have to do anything but be responsible as a person, but your energy prices are going to rise 50% every year for the next 20 years because we're going to stop you from drilling oil. We're going to stop you from getting natural gas. We're going to stop you from being energy dominant. We're going to stop you from this, that, and the. We don't want you to have a car that you can buy for $20,000 because it's an old gas, clunker. We're going to make sure that you have to only buy electric vehicles that cost $60,000. It's like right away, you don't have to come out of pocket, but on down the line, all of a sudden you got to eat bugs.
Yeah, well, we're gonna cut back on farming of beef, right? It's the type of restrictions that a free market economy, a constitutional free republic like we're used to living in, right? They're no chance in hell that they can interact any of these policies, but they have to. So they have to say it's a warlike crisis, right? That we can ration, we can change your diet to soy or to whatever because because the crisis is so bad.
We should start the war on climate change. It would make a ton of money, I mean,
yeah,
and it's not just that too. It's like regulations, right? Business restrictions. I'm sure that there's a whole list full of costs. And understand that, like, every time that you're met with a crisis, right, there's always going to be two sides of that equation, right? There's a calculus involved. The question is, do we address the crisis? Sure. If that's the only question, yes or no, obviously address it. But the problem is, it's not that simple. It's, do you do this while accepting this cost and this cost and this cost and this cost and this penalty and this penalty? And then after enough costs, all of a sudden the risk reward ratio goes in the other direction. Like, if it's gotten to the point where you have to pay all this extra stuff, and they're advocating for stuff like 15-minute cities. They don't want anybody to live more than, they don't want you to own a personal vehicle. That's what the elites in like the World Economic Forum are literally asking for. They want everybody to live in these shrunken little things where everybody drives a Minority Report taxi to work every day. And I'm like, Hell no. That's a freedom that I need. And that's,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, like that's a freedom I need. So that's the cost I'm not willing to pay. Am I willing
Yeah.
to be a good steward of the planet? Absolutely. Are you
Yeah.
asking me to like turn the light off when I leave the room? No problem. It saves me on electricity anyway. Are you asking me to give up my car? Oh, hell no.
Yeah.
In a million years, But I'm kind of interested
And
in.
yeah. So climate change, I think, is definitely one of those where we see the government wanting to grab power and put up and expect us to put up with stuff we would not put up with in the name of a crisis. We
Right.
as common people can see through that. It's not a crisis. It's an issue. It's something we need to pay attention to, but it does not justify the power grabs, the extremities, and the huge cost increases for energy that they want to have. Now,
So yeah,
I want to ask you, because a lot of people in the thing have been talking about. They throw out stuff about Epstein. Is the lack of releasing is Jeffrey Epstein's case a crisis?
that's a great question. I mean, right. So like I saw somebody mentioned it today, and I can't go online anymore and see anything conservative posted without somebody else who I don't even know if they're conservative or not also, because like I was a conservative and I wanted the Epstein files released, but I can't go anywhere anymore without seeing somebody saying release the Epstein files or release the Trumpstein files or
Yeah.
something like that, right? Like I can't go anymore. And I mean, what's funny is again we're getting to the point where we're overselling and we're gonna fatigue out, right? I was all for releasing the Epstein files and they've started to be released. I don't know if anybody's even been paying attention to it, right? Because it's like it's almost more important nowadays for people to use it as a cudgel than to actually receive the file, because it was never about receiving the files to the left, right? The
Yeah.
game is right. I was actually going to address that too. Yeah. But right, so like we got to understand that like some things are crises and some things are just not that big of a deal. We want it to happen. It would be great if it happened. We're going to push for it to happen, but it's not like if it doesn't happen tonight that the world falls apart, right? That's
Well,
what makes.
right. Well, yeah.
But
We
yeah, I
want
do
it
want
to
to.
happen. We're not defending pedos as people say it here, but a crisis. Epstein is dead, and that's part of the problem, right? So, is it
Hold
an
on,
ongoing crisis? Is it changing the way
hold
America
on.
functions?
I want to
Yeah.
talk about this for a second. So, a couple
Sure.
things. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, we're not supposed to be like world famous. That's the whole point of the
Yeah.
channel. But
Yeah.
the other thing too, Garth, this is something I hear in common nomenclature today too. Is they'll say the moment you say anything that even masquerades as an equivocation for Trump, they'll say, "Oh, so you're defending a pedophile." Right? That's
Yeah.
just like the most, and it's, by the way, it's a really, really lazy insult. A
Oh,
really
yeah.
lazy. But
It's lost its
that
power
being
too to
said,
us. It
that,
doesn't affect us.
right. But that being said, I do want to just very briefly address it.
Yeah.
A defense of a pedophile is when I say this person is okay for being a pedophile. It is not a defense of a pedophile to say this person has good policies in other areas, right? I'll give you an example. Would you defend Martin Luther King? Because he's a known womanizer and likely rapist. That isn't you defending a rapist. That's you defending a civil rights leader who also has other dark skeletons in his closet. There's a big difference there between defending a pedophile and defending somebody for the
Yeah.
good that they do, because nobody's perfect. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying that pedophilia is something to be minimized or equivocated, and I'm
Yeah.
not doing this. You find me evidence of somebody being a pedophile, and I will be happy to condemn them. Trump has no such evidence on him. Just want to throw that out there. And I'm
Yeah.
not even a Trump fan.
Yeah. And it's not something threatening our way of life. It's something that's of pure interest and something that we want to know about in the interest of good government, but it's not a crisis.
Yeah,
And any type of effort, we as common men should see through any type of effort from media or other people to elevate to a crisis is simply because they think it'll be politically bad for Trump. It's not because it's material to anything that will change to make the lives of common men worse or better.
right. So let's, all right. Enough of
Yeah.
the Epstein nonsense. Let's go on to something that I thought was like entirely made up, right?
Okay.
Entirely manufactured. You remember the Y2K?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. That was like everybody was losing their mind. It was like, oh, planes are going to fall from the skies. We're going to go back to the dark ages. No computer network is going to work at all. And again, just ask yourself, what's the effect here, right? Who stands to gain? I would bet that tech companies did, because all of a sudden, every single business in the universe had to hire tech companies to come out and fix all their computers. I mean, some of this stuff isn't that difficult to see through. It really isn't. And again, like Christian said, like go back and look at in the past, was Y2K actually a crisis? I mean, my computer was a Stone Age piece of crap that could, I think it was like a PC Junior that barely had like 32 megahertz of processing power, and like it managed the Y2K without any problems at all, and it did
It's record
nothing.
keeping. It was an accounting thing, the idea that somebody could be confused by thinking 02 or 01 was 1901 instead of 2001 or whatever. So yeah, computers dealt with it fine. It was,
Right.
but this type of thing, like there one of the things my wife loves, one of her favorite genres of movies are disaster movies, right?
Right.
People love, right? And like 2012 or other things, big volcanoes and essentially a crisis, and how people are reacting in the crisis and see the disasters. Like San Andreas, like she can just watch San Andreas on a loop, basically, right? See San Francisco like just leveled by earthquakes and tsunamis, things like that. And so we understand the interest, and yeah, we're attuned. If there's a crisis, we want to know what's going on because we don't want to get left behind, right? We want to be able to be safe. So they know that it can get our attention. It's clickbaity. The media will watch the news if there's a crisis, right? I mean,
Right.
I watch so much CNN or any news that I gave them unbelievable ratings after 9/11, right?
Yeah,
I mean, right? And so they're like, but I'm not watching that stuff now because there's not really a crisis that I need to be glued to the news to get updates on. And they're like, how can we get the common man back to watching our channel? Like hoping for updates. What's
Right.
going on? Right. And well, we got to create a crisis. What's the crisis? Right. And so here's one for me. Immigration. Sure. So
yeah.
We talk about now that there was an illegal immigration crisis, right?
Yeah.
Trump is dealing with. He says it's been dealt with, that the border is secure.
So
but the left is saying that essentially enforcing the border, the laws on immigration are a crisis, right? Treating that like a crisis. When now they did this in the first Trump administration too, but they overplayed their hand. Like they would show pictures of kids in detention centers that looked abysmal, and then you'd find out that picture was taken during the Obama administration.
Yeah, right.
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 They're like, look,
That's
you're doing this, you're trying to smear, you're just trying to bring down and enrage public opinion against the president. He's just enforcing, right? Now, right, when the left stopped enforcing the border, we had open borders during the Biden, right? It could be argued that created a crisis that Trump had to stop. Right. And I think to some degree Americans believe that and accepted that, and I think that's a big reason why he changed or why he was elected. Is people felt like we needed to have some common sense on the border.
Sure. Now let me push back some. All right, because here's where I feel like Trump overplays his hand. Right? Does immigration need to be addressed? Absolutely. Illegal immigration is running rampant. But what's the true effect? Most of the people that come across the border, most of them are a non-issue.
Yes.
Now, don't get me wrong. We still need to address it. Here's what I think the real crisis is, and this is where it's not articulated well. And this is why, by the way, this is one of the places where I feel like Trump's rhetoric is just abysmal, right? And this is where it really gets him into trouble, because he says things at that third grade level where it's like, oh, the immigrants that are coming, they're murderers, they're lawless, they're rape. Like he just says whatever, like is the quickest like most tactless, like quickest way to get the point across. When he could say things in a slightly more sophisticated manner. The real crisis was that rule of law was on a slippery slope, right? Because it's not that you needed to really, like, immigration wasn't the problem. The problem was not following our laws, right? We need to follow our own laws, because if we don't there, what's next? That's the problem. That's where the real crisis was. And so one of the concepts that I'd like to introduce here is that concept of a slippery slope. You may not be at the crisis point, but you do need to be cognizant of that next step, right? You need to be worried about, because the thing is, right, like, honestly, is there that much crime that happens as a result of immigration? It's not really as a result of immigration. It's just as a result of people, right? Like, people are here, people are in America, people commit crimes, right? With more people, yes, there will be more crime, but that's not because it's immigration. It's just because there's more people, right?
Yeah,
And
I would agree, but I think creating a climate where there was no enforcement
yeah,
felt people that they could act with impunity, and we started to get more of a behavior than we could deal with.
right.
And
That's
so,
the
even
crisis.
though Trump's numbers of actual deportations about 100,000, which
Yeah,
is really, really low, but over 1 million people self-deported, right? They think the estimate is 1.6 million people self-deported.
that's pretty
But
impressive.
it was just getting that, setting up that climate that we're not going to look
Right,
past this. That ended the crisis.
right.
Now,
Well,
right, here's the thing that I like. Well, end of the crisis.
yeah,
So there'd never been a reduction in the number of cases in the refugee immigrant backlog, right? All the people asking, there were 4.2 million cases
interesting.
waiting for a court day when Trump
Mhm.
took office,
Right,
right?
right.
That number has never gone down until now, right?
Still
It's
Trump.
still at like 3.6 or something, but he's trying to work through it. And really, I think a good point would be if he works that down, and it's, there are less than 100,000 cases pending litigation, right? Then he can really say, okay, now we can take refugees, we can process them in an orderly manner, right? We don't have this huge backlog, right? So you can justify,
Right.
the overwhelmed civil services and stuff are approaching the crisis level. But I think right now the border the border is not in crisis; it's under
Oh yeah, no,
control,
it's
and
definitely
I
under
think
control.
that's but just the enforcement of the law was not a crisis, even though Democrats tried to come up with sob stories or case studies. But overall, I think people realized it was just about creating a climate where people realized we were going to pay attention, we were going to try to follow the law.
That's funny, Garth. So Garth asked a question, and I was like, "We just answered it. You weren't listening." He's like, "Nope, I had you muted." That's funny. Well, at least you're honest. But yeah, it is good that Trump's going after criminals first. I do appreciate that. I mean, I think that's the real. It's like we said, the real crisis wasn't that people were coming across the border, right? Because it's just an imaginary line in the sand somewhere. Uh, but the real crisis, like you mentioned, is that laws weren't being enforced. We had created a culture that is like, oh, no big deal, right? Like that some laws are not important, others are, and that's a line that you can't really cross without hitting that slippery slope, because it's like anybody who gets into power could just pick arbitrary laws not to follow and arbitrary laws to follow, or to over prosecute,
Yeah.
which happens, right? And now
Well, it
Trump's
creates.
actually,
Yeah.
ironically, Trump's doing that now. He's over prosecuting the laws that we failed to prosecute before, because it's like now we have to deal with this to a level that we wouldn't have otherwise. And
Yeah.
so it's a game. It's a game that's being played.
But not seeing the huge caravans of people crossing, trying to leave Venezuela and walk from
Right.
Colombia to the U.S., right? Because that's bad for them. We don't want that. And so just having that climate where people are not doing that, I think is the
It's,
main
it
thing.
it
But
helps the
let's
whole.
not be taken in by the government doesn't need a big expansion in their power. They don't need to deprive us of freedoms, right?
Right.
And we still need to have due process. Somebody picked up because they suspected migrant needs to have evidence presented, right? We still need to follow the Bill of Rights.
That being said, like interestingly enough, and of course, I'm gonna, I don't think that the types of freedoms that are being infringed are at the same par as those that would be of a citizen because of the situation, because we're dealing with illegal immigrants. But ironically, it is the same pattern, though, right? Trump's used a crisis to infringe on liberties. They're just not American liberties, right? They're just not.
True.
They're not ours. But it's like, well, if you want our liberties, become a citizen of America. That's how we did it, right? But it is what it is. All right, so let's talk about a more recent crisis and when I say crisis, I'm gonna put it in quotes because it's not really that big of a deal. Trump's national deployment of DC. Right. Again, this is a thing that's happening. It's an event, right? It's taking place. It's not like the event doesn't exist, but is it really that big of a deal?
It's one of the stories of all time.
Yeah, right. Like, yeah, when we look back 100 years from now, we're always gonna remember, man, that Trump, what a jerk for cleaning up DC. And now, I mean, here's the big thing, right? And for those of you guys who watch this, I'm not really a fan of this action. I think that there are other actions that Trump could have taken intermittently that would have been better. But that having been said, at the end of the day, it really is not going to at the end of the day, all that's going to happen is crime's going to go down for a time. And then when they leave, it's going to go back up for a time. And hopefully there'll be some residual lasting effects, but there may not be. I don't know.
If there are, Trump will take credit.
Yeah, right. Trump will take credit either way.
yeah. Trump would like crime. People that live in DC. Now, we don't live in DC. I have not personally been affected by street crime in DC.
No.
But I had a good friend of mine that lived in Capitol Hill. They say it's 1600, right where the White House. If you're west of that, the city is very safe. If you're east of that, it's like, you live your life, being prepared for anything all the time. Like you're in the jungle, baby. And so that type of created a climate where the people in power realize that they're getting watched, right? That they've got to step up their game. And I think that's maybe right. If DC home police or local government can step up their game, maybe they were getting a little complacent because right they vote for Democrats so overwhelmingly. Even Marion Barry, who was repeatedly convicted of cocaine use and possession while mayor, kept getting reelected.
No
right?
biggie.
Then once you get elected to a city office in Washington, it's like you'll never get voted out because the opposite, nobody will vote for a Republican, right? So that leads to complacency. So if Trump can jostle them out of that, and they just do their job well. I don't care what party they are. It's not a nonpartisan issue. Right. Just govern the city well, prosecute the laws, and lock up teenagers. They basically selectively said that people under 25 were not going to be imprisoned or charged with crimes, and it created an environment again where people where there's no consequences and you get behavior more than we can handle. Right, a little bit of crime is manageable. When you get more, then all of a sudden you can't prosecute, you can't follow it up, and it becomes a hellscape.
Right. And that's why you can't just let a little bit of crime happen. Right. Like it's one thing to it happens behind your back, so be it. Right. But it's not like you say, I'm going to allow a certain amount of crime. You just can't do that, because the moment you start that culture, then the rest of the crime will flood in because they just know that you're not. It's like we talked about earlier about being a hardened target. Part of it. So one thing that I do want to.
It's not a national crisis, I would say, though. I would tell our viewers here, it is a management issue that needs to be addressed, right? But it's not the level of a crisis. Now, it did get everybody's attention, and they brought in the National Guard, which is usually a sign of a crisis, but it's not a crisis.
Yeah, right. And so that's where one of the things that I would throw this back at you with is like,
Mhm.
right, Trump made a crisis of this when it wasn't really one, right? He's like acting like, and he'll use these aggrandized words, these like,
Yeah.
New York City is a it's never been worse, and because Trump, this is Trump, by the way, in general. He'll say this is the worst that it's ever been, the best that it's ever been. We're doing something that no one's ever done before, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's the Trumpian rhetoric, right? But and so like he's saying, that Washington D.C. the crime is just it's never been like this before. When in reality, it has. It's been worse before, but that's not the point. The point is he's making a crisis out of the situation so that he can go in and fix it. But then, then the other group responds in kind by making a crisis out of a situation that also isn't a crisis. I would say this. Now, I do worry that this is a slippery slope because Trump's authoritarianism is kind of like a situation where we can go too far. The reason I don't think that DC is a problem is because he's following the law, right? As long as there are laws on the books that we are using, then I feel like the guardrails are holding.
Yeah,
We don't have to worry.
Exerting existing authority that you weren't exerting before, right? Now, it might be breaking with custom. It might be, like, hey, that's not normally how it's done, but he has the authority, know, and so it's not authoritarian just to enforce stuff that wasn't being enforced before. And I think it can be cleaned up, right? I think it's a very manageable issue, especially because next year is going to be the 250-year anniversary, and people are going to want to go to DC. And I think Trump would like it to be that people can go and not just stay west of 1600, right? Feel confident that they can go around and take their families to,
nice.
Even behind the Supreme Court area can get sketchy in a hurry. So,
Yeah. I mean, the only time I'm ever going to DC, if I'm not, hopefully you and I will be invited to the press room of the White House. But if we can't manage that, it's probably just to visit the Smithsonian anyway. So, but in any case, all right, I want to talk about the crisis of COVID because this is the crisis that really, I feel like this crisis really started to give us that like crisis fatigue because it was like being in crisis mode for a day or two. As long as the media usually moves us from one crisis to the next in relative like expedience. But like COVID was like, we had to deal with the same crisis and stay mired there for like a year and a half. Right. And so that kind of put us in a situation was like, oh, I'm so ready to be uncrisised. You know what I mean? And so, but again, like what I'd ask people to do is like ask yourself, what are the objectives on each side? So of course, on the one side, this shows you a little bit of the struggle of how to like who wants to dominate the narrative, right? Because on the one side, you had one group that was trying to overblow the panic, the fear of the COVID virus, because doing so, one, attacked Trump as a political rival. Two, it allowed them to start imposing restrictions on your liberty, things like mask mandates, vaccine mandates, like social distancing, stuff like that, to basically take away some of your freedoms, right? And number three, they wanted to, lock down the economy, which will again have political ramifications, lock down school, stuff like that, right?
And
of
it
course,
was an election year too. Like you cannot separate politics from that. Yeah.
Right. And so, of course, Trump wanted to do the opposite for the opposite reasons. And so it's interesting. One of the like interesting things in that crisis that took place is that Trump would try to like minimize the situation because the other side is trying to maximize the situation. It like became this weird like tug of war. And of course, then the one side would say, well, you're fear mongering. And the other side would say, well, you're not taking this seriously enough. And it's like a big game, right? Like, and everybody's fighting over the narrative dominance. And that's what, when it's a real crisis, when like the everybody's like trying to like fight that battle, right? To see what they can do to manipulate that crisis in their favor. Right. And Trump wanted to try to like, de-escalate the panic. He didn't want everybody thinking that we didn't have things under control, even though we didn't, right? He just wanted everybody to like go on and live their lives, and then he would have more freedom to do what he needed to do to get things under control. Meanwhile, the other side's like, what do you mean this isn't a big deal? This is not just a cult, like, and it's a game, right? It's like everybody's fighting everybody.
Down,
try to get it into so COVID was, man, I got so fatigued, so tired of COVID, of like the crisis mode, that like I think it hurt that, and the way that the media tried to manipulate it throughout that whole time. That after that, it was like anytime the media said anything, I'm like, all right, I'm fact checking this because I just can't take their word for it. It's like
I was an essential worker, and so I worked all the way through it, and nobody harassed me for it. It was one of those things. Like, I had my paperwork that I could show somebody that I was an essential worker and stuff like that.
right.
I never got asked for it once. So I think there was a lot of common sense there, but there were definitely people that reacted to sort of the narrative and freaked out. We got very emotional, and I think that's part of the thing. Crisis can trigger emotional responses, but when you're clear-headed about it, yeah, I think COVID's going to be one of those that we're going to look back on. It was unprecedented, but that the governments or local governments, not so much the national governments, reach for power is not gonna be favorable for them. I think it's going to be,
and it usually isn't, right? So, like, again, you can see with COVID, like, ask yourself what's being taken from you. Ask, who stands to gain, right? Here again, we have a clear victor. Big Pharma made a killing off of that thing, and I often wonder why. See, people don't understand. Like, it's really that simple when it comes to politics. A lot of the time, sometimes it's more complicated, but not, like, I'd say like 85% of the time, all you have to do is ask yourself, who's making the most money off of this situation? Who stands to gain from this crisis? Who stands to gain from this media narrative? Who stands to gain from this vaccine mandate? Who stands to gain from, like, all you got to do is just ask yourself a couple of little questions, and then the answer will be so. And if you guys see studies, right, and a lot of times there's going to be studies that say like multiple different things. Guess which one you pick? You pick the one that isn't objectively in their favor, right? Like, if you have like Pfizer does a study that says vaccines are great, and somebody else does a study that says vaccines got a lot of problems, well, one of them obviously has a conflict of interest. One of them doesn't. I mean, I'm not saying that you don't like look at the study to figure out, but like, read it, check the controls, check the biases, but still, that being said, like, obviously you should at least be skeptical of the one who is obviously doing something in their favor.
Yeah, a lot of times pharma things will have an abstract that says like, oh yeah, this is great, great, great. And then the study contradicts that. They just don't think anybody will read past the abstract, right?
Right. And most
so I have a spicy take.
Yeah,
I want a spicy one. I want your take. Is gun violence a crisis in America?
I was gonna bring up what was it? Hands up, don't shoot. Right? The Michael Brown Ferguson case. Because that's one of those things where the slogan was like it's made into a crisis every single shooting that takes place. Every single shooting that has happened in the last like 50 years has become media like blown up because one side is trying to say we need to take your guns away.
Well, yeah, because of the Second Amendment. But they don't want to differentiate. This is why I think it's not a crisis, because they don't want to differentiate shootings between people that know each other, disgruntled employees, jilted lovers, gang members, rival gang terror, vying for stuff, and the ones that are right. It's random attacks by somebody against somebody they don't know.
Right.
Now,
like I'll give you
it's a tragedy when it happens, but definitely. Is it a crisis? And are we ignoring it? Are we being callous by differentiating? It can be a tragedy that we don't want to happen, and that we need to, there are laws against mass shootings, right? Yeah, they still happen, right? So what? But is it a crisis that requires the expansion of government power and now the restriction of our rights? That's what a crisis says. There's a war, now the government can do stuff. So inflating into a crisis is sort of like, all right, this is special circumstances. I can cede my rights for this. I don't think it is, even though I'm not a gun owner. What do you think?
No, yeah, it's definitely well. So, and yeah, of course, again, that's the calculus, right? It's like you weigh the costs, you weigh the risk versus reward, and so the game here, right, with gun control is always a game of numbers. And the weird thing though is that one side is very straightforward about the numbers, and one side is not. The side that wants to manipulate it into a crisis is almost never honest about the numbers. They'll say things like, "Oh, it's 30,000 gun deaths a year." Which is accurate. But like 20,000 of them, 23,000 of them are suicides, which will, by the way, studies show almost certainly take place with or without the gun. And that's just how it is. If they don't get a gun, they get pills. If they don't get pills, they get a knife. If they don't get, there's a million different ways to do it, and it's terrible tragedy, and I never want to see it happen. But it's not the gun that is right. It's not the gun that's doing the suicide, right? And so the vast majority of them are just suicide. And then the remaining part, the vast majority of them is like gang violence, street violence, or like revenge situations like you were talking about. Like the vast majority of them. The part that they go after is the huge minority. They go after specifically the AR-15, which is responsible for like 800 of that 30,000 a year. Or maybe not even. Maybe I'm talking about all rifles. I'd have to go back and check the numbers myself. Like, it's such a microscopic amount compared to what the actual problem they try to communicate it. Because, like, you would assume that the actual problem is, oh no, people are dying, right? Because that would be my problem. I don't like to see people die. But let's not forget that car deaths are like 40,000 a year, 50,000 a year. Do we stop driving cars? No, we don't stop a thing just because it happens to have as a byproduct of it risk. Unfortunately, we can't make that trade every time. We'd have nothing. We couldn't even play soccer because your shins might get hit in a flag tackle. You couldn't walk out the door because you might trip, and you can't do that. You can't play the game where you just like try to minimize all risk. The game has to be maximizing of freedom while not infringing on other people's rights.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, the one that let me know it wasn't a crisis was the guy who attacked the theater, the Joker guy who attacked the theater in Denver, Colorado, because he used pipe bombs, right?
Yeah.
The laws against pipe bombs need no strengthening. Right, we do not need to strengthen the laws against pipe bombs. Right.
By the way, guys, you're not allowed to have pipe bombs.
You're not allowed to have pipe bombs. This channel stands against pipe bombs.
100% against pipe bombs.
100% against pipe bombs. And so, right, what more can the government do but arrest this guy? Like try to do it. Right. There's no sort of like taking away of guns or passing additional laws aren't going to stop somebody that's intent on making an illegal weapon, violent illegal weapon, right? And it's a tragedy, but these are some risks we take by living in a society, going to movies together, having things, and we can't give into that fear because the benefits are too high and it's too rare. But that's why it's a tragedy. We have to identify it's a tragedy. We have to make sure that guy never sees the light, breathes free air again because of the risk. It's an antisocial act. He wants to weaken our social connections, right?
Yep.
And all these random attacks, the Las Vegas shooting, all of that stuff, right, are antisocial acts against strangers. But yeah, I would say not a crisis that we give the government power to change our lives, to take our money, and to restrict our freedoms.
Right. Yeah. Here's another one that I'm curious about your take on this.
Sure.
How big of a crisis is the national debt?
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting one, right?
Well, yeah. So there's a lot of whataboutism when the Democrats are in the executive or in power. The Republicans grouse about the debt. When they're in power, they don't grouse about the debt.
You know why? Because the Republicans these days spend just as bad as the Democrats.
Yeah. Which makes me now Ross Perot brought it to national attention and got a lot of things by saying it was a crisis, that he felt like the national debt was such a level and was being mismanaged. Now, I don't know enough. I'm not elite to know how the debt is being managed.
Yeah,
That's the thing, right? We'd have the debt ceilings,
I
and
do.
then they buy and sell,
Yeah,
funds and things like that. The United States has an excellent credit rating because we have just this policy. It's not in our Constitution, but it's very strong that we pay our debts,
yep,
and so people are willing to loan us money.
yep,
Um, right, the fact that interest rates are higher makes it more expensive to do that. Can we hit some? We're not in a crisis now. Greece showed us what a crisis was,
yeah,
and we don't want to get to that level. So, it does require wisdom, but I think a lot of times is the thinking on is very short term. Congress have 2-year terms. They want to show results in 2 years.
right,
Presidents have 4 or 8-year spots. They want to see that now. Debt management is something that, right? So say Trump or the president, just a president, was really fiscal responsibility. Like,
yeah,
we cut stuff way back. Everybody hated him for doing it.
of course,
Reduce the debt $5 trillion or something,
that'd be nice.
and hands this off to the person that follows after him. It's like, hey, I led a tight ship and saved all this money for you. And that guy's like, okay, well, I have a license to spend, and then everybody likes that guy that spends,
You
right?
got all this extra money. Thanks.
I think the national debt is something we should be aware of, but I don't think it's a crisis now.
I
But
agree.
interest rates go above 10%, it's going to become a crisis in a hurry, though.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. And so that's the big game. Again, it's another one of those slippery slope things. The crisis isn't the national debt. The crisis is defaulting, right? So if we get to a point where we're going to default, then what will almost certainly happen is we'll lose our worldwide trust, which will cause us to no longer be the reserve currency, which will threaten our hegemony on the planet Earth. So that would be the game. But right now, I think you're right. I think, knock on wood, wherever wood is, I think we're probably safely at least 5 or 6 years away from any kind of crisis situation. But it wouldn't hurt if Jerome Powell would lower interest rates and we could borrow at a cheaper rate, Mr. Too Late Powell. But anyway,
All right, so we're at our hour now. I'm just interested, without going into it, what do you think is an actual crisis in America right now?
Actual crisis in America right now. Man,
is there one?
We really don't. Not really. I mean, is
homelessness a crisis? Fentanyl a crisis?
Not really. I feel like there are crises that we're involved in, but they're not really crises for us. Like, for example, I feel like Gaza and Ukraine and stuff are crises. They're just not ours, right? Like they're Israel's and Gaza's crisis and Ukraine's crisis. That's not our. I know that everybody wants to get involved on every little thing in the universe and like, personally police every cubic centimeter on Earth. I just. Like, I would love to. I mean, there's lots of things, there's lots of goals that I have, right? Lots of things I'd like to see, but nothing that I'm like, oh my God, this needs to happen today. And if it doesn't happen today, we're in trouble. Nothing like that, except AI.
Yeah.
Man, we got to do something about AI. And it's not a crisis because it's a crisis now. It's a crisis because I don't actually know when it will be. And that's the biggest problem.
Yeah.
What about you?
Exactly. I think we need to repent. I think there's a morality crisis. I think we've become too secular as a people and are drifting away from God. I think people are afraid to have families. I belong to a faith community that still encourages families a lot. And I think that's the bedrock and important to the stability of our society. But I think there's a lot of things that make it very hard and disincentivize that. Right. And we're on the edge of crisis. But I think a repentance, I think that people kind of becoming more conservative in their morals and in their politics, I think is good for our culture. I don't think we don't need to follow Europe and become more secular and,
Right.
And more liberal in our personal social aspects, right? Social conservatism and ultimately, I think families. Yeah, that's the crisis that I really worry about now.
Just out of curiosity, what would it like? you know, we talked a little bit about that line where something becomes a crisis as opposed to not really a crisis. What would it look like if it wasn't a crisis? Like if we had kind of had our morals, but it was like an issue, but not like a crisis. What would it look like if we were like?
I think if the percentage of people getting married before the age of 30
Okay.
jumped up another 20% was about what it was in the 90s. And
And
then
then that
going back 30
divorce
years.
rate stayed
And
lower.
and that yeah, the people were having children.
That's a big one, yeah.
Yeah, just having children, and our birth rate could jump was 3.1 or something like that.
Yeah,
Then
I think.
then I would feel like a lot better.
Yeah, I think if there is a crisis in America and worldwide, I think it's we're facing demographic collapse. That's probably our biggest one. I think we need to do something.
Yeah,
Anyway,
Japan. I mean, if you're watching it
yeah,
happen in Japan, it's just crazy.
yeah, China's next too. Gosh. Anyway, guys, that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it. If you guys ever want to kick us a super chat, we wouldn't hate you for it. Do appreciate your viewership though. And definitely we appreciate you watching every show. We do this every Wednesday and Saturday at 9 p.m. Please tell all your friends about us. We'll catch you next time on Common Mansplaining.
Yep, keep it coming.